Hi everyone! In this video, I'm going to show you how to make 3 easy tote bag embroidery designs for beginners. This goes from easiest to hardest. Starting with the prep, an embroidery hoop will help you get a sturdy work surface. I put the smaller hoop inside the bag, then I put the largest hoop on top and screwed it tight. You want to make sure the fabric has tension, so that when you poke a needle on it, it's easy to pull through. Make sure to choose a needle that does not leave a hole in the fabric when you poke it. This is how you prepare the needle and thread for all 3 designs. You would do this anytime you start a new thread. I'm measuring an arm's length of thread and then cutting it. I'm double knotting the thread. Next, you want to thread the needle. I just folded the thread on top of the needle and I push the thread through the eye hole, adjusting it so it has a little hangover. Now we're ready to embroider. For this bread design, I'm using 2 colors, a lighter brown and a darker brown. I'm starting with the lighter brown color. This is a full thread which has 6 strands. You can go with any type of thread, but I'm making a basic oval shape with some slits in the center. I also drew some leaves surrounding it. Make sure to sketch very lightly because it might not be erased completely. Let's start with the outline. This is called the modified back stitch. I'm coming up from the back and pulling it tight. Make 1 stitch forward. The modified back stitch basically repeats 1 forward stitch and 1 back stitch. We're going to make our back stitch. Leave a little space and then come up. Then go back into the same hole of the last stitch. Now we're going to make our forward stitch. Start in the same hole of the last stitch and then come up. Then go back down. Now we're going to make a back stitch. So come up a little space ahead, then go back down in the same hole as the previous stitch. I'm going to repeat this pattern, forward, then back, all the way around. We're going to keep doing this until we finish the outline of the bread. I'm using this stitch instead of a normal back stitch because this stitch saves a lot more thread. We're going to be using the modified back stitch for all of our designs, so make sure you remember how to do it. As you can see, the back of the stitch looks like a dotted line. To tie it off, I'm going underneath a stitch and then making a loop. Then I'm going inside the loop to make a knot. After you pull it tight, cut it off. Cut it off while leaving some excess thread. Split the thread into 2 and use those 2 pieces to tie a double knot. We're always going to do this every time we tie something off. Now it's time for the oval slits of the bread. We're going to take the same colored thread and split it in half. Make sure to split it slowly so that you don't get it tangled. As you can see, this is 3 strands instead of 6. I'm doing the same process as before, knotting the thread twice and then threading my needle. I do the same modified back stitch for outlining the center ovals. Again, this modified back stitch is repeating 1 forward stitch and then 1 back stitch. So make 1 stitch forward, leave a space ahead, come up, and then go back into the same hole of the previous stitch. As you can see, this line is a lot thinner because it's a 3-strand thread. Keep repeating that modified back stitch all the way around. Make sure you keep your stitches very small because this line is going to be curved. You don't need to fasten off your thread every time you come up to a new oval. I just continued the same thread for all 3 ovals. After I finish the ovals, I'm tying it off. Next, I'm going to use a dark brown thread for the leaves. Just like before, I'm splitting the 6-strand thread so that I have a 3-strand thread. I'm going to start at the bottom of the leaf. Now we're going to use the same modified back stitch that we've always been using. So make 1 stitch forward, and now make 1 stitch back. Once you reach the point where the leaves are, it's time to start making the leaves. Start at the stem, then go to the point of the leaf. Come up right next to where you went down, but not in the same hole. Go a little bit above your last stitch. Now go back down to the stem. That's your leaf. Now we're going to make the other leaves the same way. Start from the stem, then go out to the point of the leaf. Go a little bit above your last stitch. Now go back to the stem. We're not using the satin stitch because that takes up too much thread. When you come up next to where you left off, it saves a lot more thread. Continue using the modified backstitch for the stem part, and every time you reach a point to make a leaf, use this same method. Before I moved on to the other side of the leaves, I cut my thread and started a new thread. Now we're done with our design. Take off the hoop every time you leave your work because you don't want it to be a permanent crease where the embroidery hoop was. And that's our finished bread. This next one is a cute strawberry design. I'm starting off by very lightly sketching my strawberry. I also drew 2 little hearts and wrote "very cute" surrounding the design. Let's get started with our design. I'm using a 3-strand thread that I knotted the same way as before. For this design, we're going to start by making a forward stitch. This is called a stem stitch. Don't pull it all the way tight. Hold the loop outside of the strawberry. Now come up on the middle of that loop. Hold the loop, then release it. That's our first stem stitch. This next one is going to be different. We're going to go forward and hold the loop outside of the strawberry. But this time we're going to come up in the same hole as the previous stitch. Pull it tight. That's how you make a stem stitch. Do the same thing again. Make a stitch forward. Hold the loop. As you can see, I'm holding it on the outside of the outline, not on the inside. If you hold it on the inside like this, then you'll get a rough line. We don't want that, so we want to hold it on the outside of the strawberry. Come up on the same hole of the previous stitch and pull it tight. We're going to repeat this until we reach the leaves. As you can see, the stem stitch creates a very bold solid line, which is different from the modified back stitch. Now that we've reached the leaves, I'm going to make 1 stitch forward to end this line. It would have been smarter if I started on the other side and worked my way around the strawberry. That way I wouldn't have to end my thread. So if you're doing this, make sure you start on one end of the strawberry instead of the middle like I did. I'm just continuing making the stem stitch. As you can see, I'm still holding the loop on the outside of the strawberry. Make sure that no matter which side you're on, you're always holding the loop on the outside of the outline, not on the inside. I'm going to start a new 3-strand thread like before for the leaves. We're going to use the modified back stitch, just like the stitch we used for the bread design. I'm starting with 1 forward stitch, then 1 back stitch. I came up a space ahead, then went back down into the same hole. Then I came up in the same hole of my last stitch and went forward. Keep doing this pattern until you reach all the way around the leaves. For the seeds of strawberry, it's really simple. I just took my 3-strand thread and I'm making little stitches. I went up and went down to make a line. I started a new 3-strand thread for the heart. I first started at the point of the heart, then I went to the corner. I came up to the same point, then I went to the other corner to create a V shape. Now I'm going to fill in the V shape. Starting from the bottom point, I'm going out to the top edge. Make sure you always start at the bottom point. Once you filled it in, clean up the top edge. I came up in the middle, then went to the outer point. This creates the line across the top. I did the same for the other side. I made sure to cut my thread before I went to the other heart. I'm making the heart the exact same way, starting with a V shape first, then filling it in, and I'm straightening up the top edges by making 2 lines across. Now it's time to embroider the words. I started with a new 3-strand thread and I'm making the same modified back stitch for the words. This time I'm making very small stitches so that I can get the exact curve of the letters. I started a new thread for the second word after I embroidered the first one because the 2 words were far apart. And here's the final result. It's super cute. You can embroider any words you want. This koi fish design was the most complicated and it took me the longest to make. To sketch out the design, I first started with a pencil sketch. As you can see, it's very light and you can barely see it, so I decided to go over it with some chalk. I have a wet tissue with water that I'll use to erase the chalk. Now I'm outlining my pencil sketch with the white chalk. It's super easy to erase the chalk. You just need to rub it with a wet cloth and it comes out right away with water. I also drew some smaller fishies on the side. I knotted and threaded a white 3-strand thread. We're going to do the outline with a chain stitch. To do the chain stitch, start up on any point of the outline of the fish. Make 1 stitch forward. Once you pull it tight, skip a space and come up. Now we're going to go underneath the first stitch that we made. Pull it tight. You want to make sure that the thread is flat against the fabric. Come back into the same hole of the stitch that we just made and pull it tightly. And that's your first chain stitch. This is called a reverse chain stitch. We're going to repeat the pattern, so come up a space forward. Go underneath the previous stitch. Pull it tightly. Then go back into the same hole. Continue this all the way around the outline of the fish. Make sure that you don't outline the fins yet. We're only going to outline the tail and the body right now. As you can see, the chain stitch creates a chain-shaped line. This creates a very bold line, which is perfect for our border. As you can see, I'm skipping right over the fins and just continuing the line across it. We're going to be doing the fins later. The tail part isn't going to be 100% perfect. When you make the chain stitch around the corner, it's going to leave a little line, but that's okay because that's how it's supposed to look. Just keep making the stitches as normal. Now I've reached the end. Make sure to leave a gap instead of fully connecting the line. I started a new 3-strand thread for the whiskers. Use the modified back stitch to make these lines. Now it's time to outline the fins. Just like the rest of the body, I'm going to use the chain stitch with 3-strand thread. Once you finish one of the fins, cut it off and start a new thread. Do the same chain stitch for the other fins. We want to start a new thread each time because it would be wasting thread if we cross so far away to the other fin. For the fin details, we're going to use a 2-strand thread. I'm using the modified back stitch. The smaller fins only have 1 line, the medium fins have 2 lines, and the tail has 3. My sketch has disappeared a little bit, so I'm going to go back over it with some chalk. The spots that are colored in are the spots that I will make orange. I'm going to use a new 2-strand thread for the spots. For the 2 larger spots, I'm making an outline using the modified back stitch. Next, I'm making a small line at the top for an eye. I made my first stitch. Now I'm going to double layer the line to make it thicker. Come up right next to where you left off, but not in the same hole, and then go across. This makes the line a little bit thicker. After that, we're going to start doing an orange spots with a full 6-strand thread. So this is how you do the modified satin stitch. Come up and go across. Leave a little gap and come up right next to our last stitch, but not in the same hole. Then go across. We're going to continue this pattern. So come up next to our last stitch, but leave a little gap. The gap should be about the same width as 1 strand of thread. We're going to go back over and fill in the gaps later, so don't worry about making this perfect. We're coming up next to a last stitch instead of going across because it saves a lot more thread. Once you reach the bottom of the pattern, go back around and fill in the gaps in the same way. Make sure you always come up next to the last stitch. Continue doing this for all of the orange spots. You can make the orange spot any size you want. As you can see, the back of the stitch is a dotted line. The extra piece of loose white thread that came off from the back gave me an idea to start adding some white thread to the orange spots, and I think it actually looks a lot better now. For the white spots, I just made a normal line. Then I made the line thicker by going over it a second time. When you go over it again, make sure to come out right next to where you left off on the previous stitch. Now I've shifted my embroidery hoop to move to the 3 little fishies. To fill in the little fishies, I use different colors of thread. Again, use the same mattified satin stitch that we've been using for the orange spot. So first I made a bunch of lines with gaps in between. And for the tail, I just made 2 straight stitches connecting to the body. Then I went back and filled in all of the gaps. Don't worry if the edges look rough because we're going to fix that later. After the base color, I took a different color to make the spots. Try to cover the edges with your new color. This will hide the rough edges of the design and will make it look a lot more finished. You can add the spots anywhere, like on the tail or on the body. Here's the finished design. It took me a long time, but it turned out really great. Please give this video a like if you enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.